Hello and welcome to Exotic Gardening UK, Yorkshire Kris Weekly. And here are some jobs to do in the month of June. Now, if May wasn't a good month for planting out because the weather was too bad, June is the month to get everything completely planted out that you're going to plant out for the season. Frosts have definitely pretty much gone now. Warm days and more importantly warm nights is what we've got in June, July, August, September and so on. So June is when we get everything planted out, including the more tender plants like Coleus solenstomum and some of the begonias as well, and the sort of the house plants you can bring out in the garden in June as well. And one of the big plants that I got out in May and carried on into June are the bananas. So you've got the inset bananas, and these have kept all the leaves that they've grown inside because I hardened them off well, so they've come out with 3 or 4 leaves a piece, and it won't take long before these are absolutely enormous and be many meters tall with dozens of big vibrant green and red leaves. And these are big architectural sort of dot plants in the garden. Then we've got all the small foliage plants. So today in June I'm going to be planting the small solenstomum, the iracines, the plectranthus. It gives all a splash of colour throughout the borders, but they are on the tender side, so that's why I wait until June to get these sort of plants out in the garden. So these are some of the plants that I'm talking about. So here we've got a mixture of bloodleaf or iracine, which comes in various different colours, and these are the plants that you've seen in previous videos, overwintered cuttings, and then I took cuttings of those cuttings and of those cuttings again to really bulk up the stock. So we started with about 10 plants and now we've got about 50 plants that we planted around the garden, and that's occurred over the last few months. So you check out my monthly videos, you'll see how I go about doing this. And we've also got the plectranthus as well, which is a similar sort of plant, low growing foliage plant, and there's various types. We've got this one here with the purple reverse to the leaves. We've got a variegated cream, yellow and sort of bluish green there as well. And we've got various other plants dotted about, and I've planted these in a mixture, sometimes in groups of 3 or 4, sometimes one of each, so they can merge together. And it's important to keep space between your plants when you plant them out in June because they grow big really quickly. The days are longer now and there's lots of growing time. We've got about 18 hours a day of daylight at the moment, so plants can really motor and put on lots of growth provided they're really well watered and we get some good weather. So make sure you dot them about and don't get them too close together, because in a matter of a couple of weeks, so by the end of June, all the soil will be covered by foliage. You won't see the soil and you have lots of lush growth throughout the garden. Now you might have heard of the Chelsea chop, where you cut back herbaceous plants by half, and end of May when Chelsea flower shows on, where you can also do it in early June as well for many plants, and that's what I'll be doing for this Persicaria purple fantasy, because it's grown very vigorously now, but I want it to also look good in August and September. If I cut this back by half, it'll stop it flowering and you'll get another flush of vigorous striking leaves like you see here. And it'll continue the foliage looking really good right through to October or even longer. So here we have my Cycas revoluta. It's been planted out now for I think about 5 years, and it's okay to do that if you wrap it in winter to keep the frost and the cold away from the centre of the plant. And the leaves are a bit past their best now, and this is not really down to cold damage, although there's little bits of cold damage. You can see the odd little dead leaflet just there and here and there, but the overall condition of these leaves look a bit yellowish because these leaves I think are 3 years old now. So the way the cycad grows is it sort of brings out all its leaves all in one big flush, and it does this depending on location once or twice a year in ideal locations where it lives in its habitat, or here in the UK maybe one flush a year, or one flush every other year, or sometimes one flush every 2 or 3 years. But there is a way to make it flush more often, and that is to remove all the leaves in June. So now we're in June, we can really sort of help this plant along by producing a new flush of leaves. Like I said, these look a bit past the best. They're still greenish, but they're quite old leaves now. So the way to make it flush is June going into July will be the hottest months of the year, hopefully, and it's when it's got the maximum chance of growing. So what we do is remove all these leaves. So it looks a bit brutal because there's been no greenery left, but you just take these off quite close to the base, and we could count them if we wish, because we get a flush of about 30 to 50 leaves, something like that. By taking off all these leaves, it's forcing the plant to either grow or die, basically. One thing I will say about cycads, like Cycas revoluta here, is that they are very poisonous, especially to animals. If you've got a dog that's like chewing plants, it's unlikely to chew this plant because it's got a bit of spikiness about it, but just be wary that they are pretty poisonous. So I'll just remove all these leaves, like so. I do have a couple of little pups round the side here, so I'll just remove those leaves. And then we're left with what we call the trunk, or the cortex here. And in the centre, we have where the new leaves will emerge. And what we need to do now we've cut all the leaves off and we're in June, is to give this really, really good water. So get a couple of watering cans full, add some seaweed fertiliser as well, just to promote growth, which is great. Seaweed does promote growth in all plants really, and basically soak this, make it nice and wet, and if we wish we could put a plastic cover over the top just to keep the heat in, and within about 4 to 6 weeks we should hopefully see the centre erupt into growth, and then the leaves will harden off before it gets to autumn. So it's a great job to do in June if you haven't had a flush for a year or two on your cycad. You may notice that your Cycas palms are flowering in June, and you get male and female plants on different plants. So to tell the difference between male and female, it's pretty easy once you know what you're looking for. Basically, on male plants you're going to get pollen. So in this case, this is a male. If you just stroke over it like this, you can see all the pollen falling off, and if you look at your fingers, you get little yellow dusty pollen granules like that. And also you notice you'll have bees and wasps visiting the flowers as well. Whereas on the female flowers, they're greenish tinge rather than pure yellow, and there's no pollen on them whatsoever, and you don't see the bees going around these as much as the male flowers. Now I bang on about hardening off plants in lots of my videos and the importance of doing so you get a really good start to your plants once you've planted them out. You don't get too much damage, and they can really be set up for the season to grow away really well. And on slow growing plants it means you don't get damage to put the plants back. This is a great example here. These are some cannas. These are Canna musifolia grande, which will grow absolutely enormous. They look like bananas once they get a bit bigger. And these have been hardened off properly over a couple of weeks in shade and then into full sun and finally planted out. And look at these. Yes, got a bit of slug damage on some of the leaves, but they're healthy. They've got no bugs on these, they've got no burning on these. They're looking really healthy. And if you compare those to these, which are the same plant, same species of canna, and you can see how battered the leaves are. These were brought out from the greenhouse and put straight into the garden, not quite full sun, but into a bit of sun for a few hours a day. And you can see the leaves have been battered, they've had sun scorch, the wind has battered the foliage because it's so soft when it comes out of the greenhouse. And that's what happens if you don't harden off plants. Obviously with fast growing plants like cannas, the newest leaves will be fine and they'll quickly outgrow these tatty leaves. But if you had a slow growing plant and you didn't harden it off, then you're stuck with really bad damaged leaves for a long time. That's why I keep talking about hardening off plants, and hopefully you can see the difference between hardening off and not hardening off plants. Now June is a key month for feeding your plants. You've got everything now into full growth in the garden, the soil's warm, and you've got to feed. If you want big leaves, lots of flowers, and if you want lots of fruit on certain plants as well. So we talked about bloodfish and bone in April for more mature plants that stay in the ground. Got a big bag of it here, but you also want to give a boost to all the sort of tender annuals that you put out as well. So we talk about using chicken manure, chicken pellets. So also you can use sort of the chemical versions of that as well, but they're not great for the soil in the long term. It's great to use seaweed fertilizer in conjunction with chicken pellets because that's a good sort of natural fertilizer. It really boosts growth throughout the season. And you can buy these in little paper cartons, and you can buy them in sort of tubs as well. And if you've got a lot of plants to feed, it's far more cost effective to get a great big bag like this. So this is bloodfish and bone. Normally things like bloodfish and bone, horn and hoof, you get in like a carton, it's about 1 kilogram, and it'll cost something sort of like £4 to £6, something like that. Whereas you can get a big 25 kilogram bag here for £25, and it works out far cheaper. And to be honest, you're going to need it this much if you've got a lot of plants to feed. And things like the chicken pellets and also the bloodfish and bone, you sort of sprinkle around your plants and then dig it over with either a little garden fork or a hoe just to work it into the top of the soil, water it in, and then the nutrients will start going into the ground. And it's a slow release, but it's a continuous release until the fertilizer's been used up. So it'll feed them, and then in a month's time or another month after that, maybe in August, we can put some more chicken pellets down on the really hungry plants like this and continue feeding throughout the season. Now your tree ferns, Dicksonia and Cycas, now in June should be well underway to flushing or finished flushing, so all the leaves should be emerging by now. But if you've had frost, you may find that you've got a tree fern like this one which hasn't flushed, and what's happened is frost has got in and it's killed the top fronds, the ones that are basically ready to unfurl in here, but were blackened off by the frost and died basically. And when they've died, they're just stuck there, and we need to remove them or help them to come out so that new growth from underneath and from the sides can emerge and the new leaves can come out if your plant's alive. Obviously if you had a really bad cold spell, it might have killed the tree fern completely. So if we look in the centre of this one, we can see that there's no sign of life at this stage. But if we just get our finger and just rub the hair to one side, see you've got a nice green frond there, so that one's fine. But if we look at others, I'll try to find others like this one here, that one's black and gone a bit soggy, but there's bits of hardness in there as well, which will prevent other fronds from merging. So we've got to remove these. So you can use your fingers Just remove some of this fluff to see what we're working with. Or in this case I've got a knife and I'm going to just cut this one out. And you can see it's gone a bit blackish green here and black on top, so that was a dead one. So you need to work your way around carefully because you don't want to remove ones that are going to come out. But like I said, by this stage most should have come out by now if they were going to grow. So we carefully go around. So we know there's one alive there, so we want that to be able to come out, so there must be a dead one stopping it coming out. So we'll just go in. Yeah, there's a couple of dead ones by the side of it there. Scoop that out. Obviously nature, if they're left to their own devices, what will happen, if this ever happened that it would get frosted, is that the pressure underneath of the growth would try to push out, and hopefully some would, but you might get a bit of deformity where it's just pushed out on one side and not the other. Or, worst case scenario, although I find it unlikely, is that all the dead material goes hard and stops the new material coming out, the new leaves, and it could potentially strangle and kill the plant. So we just go around. It's quite hard to see at the moment because of all this fluff. And just remove, there's a dead one, completely dead. You can see all the black. So I've given that a bit of space now for this one to come out, and it'll take a while. It could take, a couple of months before we see a flush on here, because it takes a while for the plant to grow new crosias, new leaves underneath. And in worst case scenario, it might not push out until the following season. But with the sight of this green one here, I think we'll get a few crosias coming out, and hopefully a bit of a flush within the next month or two. So I'll just carry on working on this. If you've got the same sort of situation, don't despair. Only start worrying if you get a really orange smelly goo come out, because that means the plant's basically died, or at least some of the crosias have died. But sign of green means it's alive. This will recover, and it's strange that this one had that damage, whereas other ones, which were not far away, are completely fine and have flushed as normal. But it was a particularly cold winter last year, and obviously all plants are variable. Some are hardier than others, even in the same species and the same location. So it'll take a bit of time just to get all this stuff out, because you've got to be careful. There we are, got lots out there. And then we'll just wait for new ones to emerge, hopefully over the next few weeks. Thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK. Join me next week where we're doing more in the garden.